In this video, we're talking about innovation, but I could have just as easily called this video change management. Even if you find yourself working in an industry that you don't consider particularly innovative, you will be dealing with external change. So we'll talk about what causes external change in an industry and how a company can best react through an innovation strategy. So what drives change? Here I'm going to refer you back to your PESTLE framework. From the consumer side, the biggest determinants of change would be changing preferences, changes in demographics. An aging population requires different products and services than a young population, economic changes, and social changes. A good example of changing consumer preferences impacting an industry would be the newspaper industry. As many of you are aware, print media has been in hot water for some time now as consumers moved more and more online and prefer to read the news in a digital format. In response, you've seen traditional news outlets suffer quite a bit and consolidate, but also innovate with new delivery mechanisms for the news. But to play devil's advocate here, it's a famous Henry Ford quote to say, if I had asked people what they wanted, they would have said faster horses. Sometimes innovation has to be pushed down from the supply side. But what drives change in an industry? What motivates companies to innovate? Necessity is the mother of innovation. Yes, it's cliche, but it's true. So when an industry faces pressure from new entrants or new technologies, decreased industry profitability, stricter regulation, or shorter product life cycles, and by that I mean updates of the same product are coming out more and more frequently. You see this in smartphones, you saw this in computer processors. This is what drives supply push change. One theory that seeks to explain change is the industry life cycle theory. Industry life cycle tells us that over time, most industries follow a pretty predictable pattern. There's an introduction phase when competition is fairly limited. There are usually only a few players, and they compete primarily on technology. Innovation focuses around product. There's a growth phase where profitability is usually high at this point. There are a few more competitors, and the focus on innovation is around process technology. In other words, making the industry more efficient. There's a maturity phase where oftentimes profitability is high but declining, and industry dynamics focus on shakeout and consolidation. At this point, you start seeing exit from the industry. Finally, there's a decline phase in which there's minimal innovation. The product oftentimes becomes commoditized, and competition is characterized by price wars and exit of less efficient players. You would think by looking at the industry life cycle chart that it's most attractive to get into the industry early in the industry's life cycle. And that, of course, is true. We've talked about first mover advantages in this class, but there are some risks to being an early adopter. You could pick the wrong technology standard. You might not be following a real consumer trend. It might just be a fad or a fluke. You run the risk of having further technological innovation kind of overwhelm the standard you've chosen. And finally, there are pioneering costs, which means if customers are not used to using your product or service, you might have to go out and do quite a bit of advertising and education in order to build a market for the product. And then competitors can come in at a later date, and there's already a market for a product, so they don't have to spend quite as much to educate consumers. So this all begs the question, how do firms cope with all this external change? The primary way firms cope with external technological change is through their innovation strategy. when we talk about innovation, we're talking about primarily three types of innovation. You have product innovation, which is when a company like Apple comes out with a new iPhone with new features. You have process innovation, and that's when a firm figures out how to do something more efficiently, more cost effectively, or simply better. And then you have business model innovation. And a good example of that would be how Uber disrupted the taxi market. Of course, product, process, and business model innovation do not happen in a vacuum. They oftentimes happen in tandem with one another. So this was a 4-blocker from your reading that talks about the distinction between business model innovation and technical innovation, which includes both product and process innovation, and the different combinations you can have therein. We'll look at the distinction between routine and radical innovation and disruptive and architectural innovation very quickly. Routine innovation is essentially just doing something you already do, but doing it a little bit better. A good example would be if Gillette were to add another razor blade to its standard men's shaver. Radical innovation would be doing something you already do, but doing it way better. So it would be like a pharmaceutical company developing a new treatment for Hep C, for example. It would still be delivered through traditional pharmaceutical channels, but the treatment itself just might be leaps and bounds beyond anything that's available in the market today. On the other hand, disruptive and architectural innovations truly change the industry. They can create a new market, but oftentimes transform or destroy the current market through a process that's been called in the past creative destruction. You see a lot of this in the media industry. The music industry is one good example, where you see streaming services like Pandora and Spotify taking over market share from Apple iTunes. And a generation ago, you saw Apple iTunes taking over market share from traditional recorders and producers. So one of your readings told you you must have an innovation strategy. So what does that actually mean? The idea is just like you have a general strategy or approach to your competitors or to the market, you should have a thoughtful approach to innovation, and you should think about what the ultimate aim is. We've talked about some of the drivers behind innovation here and some of the different types of innovation. Different types of organizations are better suited to different types of innovation. You wouldn't expect a large, mature, established company to be coming up with architectural innovations on a regular basis, because typically that's just not how they're geared to work. So that leads us to the discussion of innovation tactics. We talked a bit about supply push innovation. It's kind of the traditional model where a firm has an R&D lab and kind of pushes out innovative new products. There's the flip side of that coin, which is demand pull, which sometimes is conducted by a central R&D lab, but focuses on IDing customer problems and then innovating in order to solve them. But then there are the open source innovation platforms that have become a hot topic lately. So if you hear phrases like crowdsourcing or co-creation, or basically P&G's whole connect and develop strategy, is essentially a strategy to leverage outside innovation resources and then tailor them for P&G's customers. Of course, there's always the option to acquire outside R&D patents or research or even businesses.